Greetings and salutations. Today we'll be covering the unsettling mystery of the Hinterkaifeck murders. On Friday night, late March 1922, a German family and their new maid would meet an unfortunate end at their remote family farm. Law enforcement would go on to interview several suspects in an effort to find the person or persons responsible for the crime, which ended 6 lives. However, more than a century has passed and no one has been charged with the horrifying slayings which occurred in the Bavarian homestead. The Hinterkaifeck murders remains one of Germany's oldest unsolved murders. On April 4th, 1922, Lorenz Schlittenbauer noticed that his neighbor's mail had been piling up. Worried that something might have gone wrong on the farm, he recruited a few neighbors, Jacob Sigel and Michael Bull, to help him investigate and find out what had happened. When they got to the home, they noticed that the front door was locked, which caused the men to head into the barn, where they would discover the gruesome and grisly sight of Victoria Gabriel, her daughter Carzila's, along with Victoria's parents, Andres Gruber and Carzila Gruber, all long past, forcibly taken from their mortal coil. Each family member had been slain through multiple blows to the head. The bodies had been stacked on top of each other unceremoniously, and partly they had been covered by boards and hay. Wanting to investigate further out of curiosity, the men found a hallway which connected the barn to the main house, and inside the house they found yet another grisly sight. The family's 44-year-old maid, Maria Bagumunter, and Victoria's 2-year-old child, Joseph, and much like the rest of their family, they were no longer amongst the living. They had been bludgeoned while resting in their beds. Although the murders were not discovered until April 4th, the police had determined that the family had all died on the evening of Friday, March 31st, during Maria's first day of work as the family's maid, and her sister would later confirm to everyone that she had been alive the afternoon of her first day at work when she had gone to visit her sister. It must be noted that the following day, a pair of coffee salesmen would go by the farm. However, they would receive no answer. Yet, they noticed that there was smoke coming from the chimney, and someone had seemingly fed the family's livestock. A repairman had also arrived at the house on April 4th, yet found no one there. The mail had been piling up, the family was missing, and it was recognized that the family had missed church on Sunday, along with Kozila not showing up for school, all contributed to why the men were so eager to search the home and the barn. The closest police department to Hinterkaifeck was in Munich, Germany, which was around 45 miles away, and after discovering the bodies, Schlittenbauer, along with the other men with him, would go on to alert their families and fellow neighbors about the gruesome murder scene that they had found. However, by the time investigator George Ringbauer arrived from Munich, dozens of people had walked through the crime scene, destroying evidence, along with, in the process, compromising the entirety of the police investigation. However, despite the tampered crime scene and the virtual lack of forensic testing available to them at the time, the police would go on to theorize that the killer, or killers, they were not sure as of yet how many there were, had somehow lured the family members out into the barn one by one so they could be slain, before returning home to end both the maid and the young child. On April 5th, 1922, Dr. John Baptist Allmuller conducted autopsies on several of the victims of the Hinterkaifeck murders, to which he subsequently determined that they had all died from blunt force trauma, specifically to the head, and that the weapon was likely a pickaxe or a mattock. The doctor also noted that there were strangulation marks on the older Kozila, whereas the younger Kozila seemingly took hours to pass, trapped underneath her own family's bodies. A truly nightmarish end, if there ever was one. Investigators found that Kozila was holding fistfuls of her own hair due to her hair having several bald spots. Apparently, she had ripped them out either in a panic or in extreme pain. Dr. Allmuller suspected that the little girl had probably passed from a combination of her injuries along with severe shock. In the months and weeks leading up to the killings, a number of strange events had been noted to have occurred in the Hinterkaifeck farm, such as 6 months prior to the event, having the family's previous maid reportedly quit due to hearing footsteps in the attic. Said footsteps had led her to believe that the house was haunted. The neighbors also told police that Andres Gruber had found footprints in the snow that began in the woods surrounding the farm, which appeared to have entered the barn barn. However, he could find no footprints leading away from the barn, and due to the barn being connected to the house, this revelation led to the theory that the killer had hidden in the barn and perhaps even in the house's attic, which would account for some of the footsteps that the maid had supposedly heard. Andres also mentioned that some of his keys had gone missing, and that he had found a newspaper he did not subscribe to in his home. However, he would decline the offer of borrowing a weapon from one of his neighbors in order to protect himself along with his family. It must be noted that 7 years before the incident, Victoria and Andres were accused of engaging in familial relations with each other after someone had submitted an ominous report. Both the father and daughter would be put on trial and eventually be found guilty, which had led Andres to serve 1 year in a penitentiary, and Victoria herself had either served 1 year or 1 month, according to contradicting reports. However, many believe that Victoria's 2-year-old son did not have a paternal relation with his own grandfather, but rather with Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the man who had initiated the search on April the 4th. However, some other neighbors believed that the child was the product of Andres' relations with his daughter. Over the course of the investigation and preceding re-investigations into the case, authorities would end up building a list of suspects of over 100 individuals. One of the early theories, which a lot of resources were invested into, was that Lorenz Schlittenbauer was likely the killer and may have killed the family in order to hide the romantic relationship he had had with Victoria, along with Joseph allegedly being his son. Some even would go on to claim that Lorenz had referred to Joseph previously as mein Bulberl, which translates roughly to my boy. Rumors would also spread, however, that Lorenz suspected Andres was actually the father of the young lad, and that this had driven Lorenz so far as to put another official complaint of improper familial relationships between Andres and Victoria. However, others believe that he had not, due to her request. However, through the entire investigation, there was no solid evidence or link to tie Schlittenbauer to the murders, or prove that he was Joseph's father. This led to the authorities eliminating him as a suspect. Another complication in the case was that there had been some notable issues stemming from the ownership of the farm itself, due to it being owned by Victoria rather than Andres, due to her having gained ownership after her husband, Carl Gabriel, had passed. Some had alleged that Carl knew Kozilla was actually Andres' daughter, which is why he went on to live with his parents for several months before going off to the war. There are also claims that Carl was sighted during World War II wearing a Soviet military uniform, which some used to speculate that he had actually just fled to the Soviet Union. However, authorities have never been able to confirm any of these theories. After their autopsies had been conducted, the court physician removed the heads of all 6 victims, and he had reportedly sent them to Munich for further investigation. Supposedly, the skulls of Gruber's, along with the maid, had also been given to clairvoyants, presumably in an effort to suss out the perpetrator through supernatural means. However, for some reason, even though it was supposedly unnecessary, the victims' skulls would be kept in Munich, thus leading the Gruber family, along with Maria, to be buried, in essence decapitated. According to authorities, their skulls would go missing, in part due to the upheaval caused by World War II. Later, in 1999, an elderly woman would contact authorities claiming that her landlord had admitted to having information about the Hinterkaifeck slayings. Officials would go on to investigate this tip, and the landlord supposedly had made his claim in 1935. However, unfortunately for authorities and all those involved, it was too late, as the potential suspect mentioned had already passed. In 2007, significantly more than 50 years after the Gruber family had been slain, students at Fürstenbuch Police Academy applied modern investigative techniques to attempt to solve the case, and through this they were able to rule out all but one suspect, whom they believed to have committed the crimes. However, due to the suspect having been long past, they decided not to publicly name the person whom they believed was responsible for the slaying. slayings, out of respect for the suspect's living relatives and the victim's memories. The list of officially recognized suspects includes Carl Gabriel, the former husband of Victoria Gabriel, who had been reportedly killed in France during a shelling attack during World War I. However, his body had never been recovered, which has led some people to believe that rather than actually being dead, he had faked his own passing in order to get vengeance on Andreas, his father-in-law, along with his wife, by slaying them and their rumored son for siring a child through indecent familial relations. There are some rumors which involve Soviet prisoners having been released by a German-speaking Soviet officer who had claimed, or supposedly claimed, to have been the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Some of these men would later revise their statements, which would drastically diminish the credibility. Now, these statements were used to build the potential case that Carl had secretly fled to the Soviet Union and become an officer after the brutal slaying. Another suspect is Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who shortly after the death of his wife was believed to have started a relationship with Victoria, supposedly fathering Joseph. He would come under suspicion by locals primarily, rather than the actual investigation, due to several suspicious actions which he took on immediately after the discovery of the bodies. This included breaking down the gate in order to enter the barn. This was because the doors had been locked. However, immediately after finding the 4 bodies in the barn, he would apparently unlock the door with a key which he had suspiciously used to enter the house alone. This key was the key which had been purported to have gone missing several days prior to the incident, though the possibility remains that as a neighbor and as Victoria's potential lover, Lorenz might have been given a key in order to enter and see her. When asked by his companions why he had gone in the house alone when the murderer might still be there, there are claims made that he had allegedly stated that he wanted to go look for his son, Joseph. However, it remains unknown if he had disturbed the bodies at the crime scene, thus potentially compromising the investigation while building an alibi by being the one who discovered the bodies. For years, the locals would continue to believe that he had been the culprit. This is to the point that before his death, Schlittenbauer had conducted and won several claims of slander against persons who had described him as the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. Another set of suspects were the Gump brothers. Adolf Gump, along with his brother Anton, had been supposedly accused by their sister on her deathbed, where she claimed, or supposedly claimed, that Adolf and Anton had committed the murders, and as a result, Anton was remanded into police custody. However, Adolf had already died by 1944, and after a short time, Anton would be dismissed and set free. Then later, in the 1954 case against him, he would be officially discounted as a perpetrator because it could not be proven that he had committed the crime or even been involved in it. Yet another pair of brothers were suspected. These were the Taylor brothers. The Taylor brothers, who, according to statements from the former maid, had been reported as committing several minor burglaries in the area just prior to the crime. She had said that Joseph had stood at her window at night and asked her questions about the family, but she reportedly gave no answer, and in conversation, Joseph claimed to know which family member was sleeping in which room, and had reportedly stated that they had a large amount of money. During their conversation, the former maid noted that there was another person nearby, and according to her statements, Joseph and the stranger had looked at part of the house and turned their eyes upwards in suspicion. These are just a few of the purported suspects. Unfortunately, even with 80+ years of investigation and research into this case, little has come about. While there is a supposed suspect which the students at the police academy believe to be the potential killer, there has been no official movement in the case for decades, and it seems unlikely that there will ever be. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you. And I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.